Hello, and welcome to another video where we're talking about Lorcana. Great fun. And if you're bored by the screen being a bunch of deck list names and a tournament result, don't worry, I'm going to get into some lists later on in the video. But this is going to be talking about Infinity. And I think a lot of people just hadn't been thinking about Infinity. I think the excitement and the ability and the want to sort of progress their set 9 games, like they've probably got more things to do in set 9 than they do in Infinity right now. People really wanted to just make sure they had the perfect deck to be playing. But Infinity is sort of, I wouldn't say it's around the corner, but I think a lot of events you're going to, you're going to have side events of Infinity. Maybe your locals might be running an Infinity game. Maybe you just want to start testing it. Maybe you're intrigued by it. But I've got like a bit of testing into it. And I'll admit with Infinity, a lot of this information and a lot of my opinions and a lot of everything is formed from other players who I'm fortunate enough to get to chat to, have played in the big events. We had one in Southside Gaming and one in Ink. Because outside of that, you know, your locals probably isn't playing much Infinity. The online sims that we don't really talk about, I believe there is an Infinity format on there, but it's not as popular. Not many other people are playing it. Not many people are pushing lists. Not much, I would say. I don't know. The innovation levels for Infinity are not as high as the innovations for Core Constructed that we're at set 9. So there isn't much to really go on there. Of course, like I say, I've played my handful of games and talked to people I trust and sort of form my own opinions on it. And it was quite, you know, and looking for all the data, watching all of the games as well that we got to see at Southside and anything that's basically watched on YouTube for Infinity. So I think I've got a fairly strong opinion on it, hopefully quite knowledgeable on it, and whatever I say, take really at face value because it's just my opinion. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine. So in Infinity, it does seem like I'm going to have to go out there and just put a very strong statement to begin with. I think it is the pet decker's dream. And if you don't know what a pet decker is someone who's, you know, if your pet deck is, you know, the deck that you always like to play is Ruby Sapphire. I think Ruby Sapphire will be in a position where it's always going to be fairly quite strong in Infinity, and I'm only using Ruby Sapphire as an example. You could put Amber Steel in there, you could put Sapphire Steel in there, you could put Green Steel in there, you could put Green Purple, Red Ruby Amethyst. Any of the decks, they all feel like they fairly have a shot in Infinity, and every set you're just going to be getting a bigger card pool. Of course, I still think it's kind of early on from where we are. You know, we've only really all the other sets, so we're all the prior sets to Infinity right now, so sets 1 to 8, and on top of that, the 33 new cards that we got in set 9. On top of that, we also get the things that rotate out and the banned cards. So I think on face value, to begin with, my assumption was that Ruby Sapphire and Sapphire Steel were just going to be two very, very powerful decks. They're just going to be dominating it. Like the top cuts would just be top 8s of both of those decks, and everything else really wasn't worth looking at. I don't think that's really the case. I think the case is those two are probably tier 1 decks. The reason why they got banned and Hiram was removed from the game was because they were performing at such a high level. And I think, you know, in set 9, of course, we got a rotation happening instead, so we probably wouldn't have seen those decks around because, you know, all the good cards kind of rotated out. But in set 9, you know, you can see majority of players, the first thing they're thinking of is, right, you know, Sapphire Steel had a very good game. It didn't get to play for very much. It didn't have many events. I'll play that. A lot of people were like, I was never really losing of Ruby Sapphire Control, you know, the Sisu item build with Hiram and Sapphire Coil and Big Sisu. So I'll play that as well now. And both those two decks, you know, over the 2 events that I have on the screen, they perform very well. And like I say, I've got a couple deck lists. I've got about 4 deck lists to show you that I think really highlight all my points on Infinity. Those 2 decks are definitely at a tier 1, you know, highest tier, not tier S, not tier 0, you know, not to the point where they are completely win the meta and there is no point playing anything else. That I don't believe that's where we're at with Infinity, but those 2 decks are very much performing higher than any other deck or any other color combo. But I think outside of that, people took a lot of initiative in the fact that this is something I really didn't think about. But of course, with the 33 new cards, we didn't get many new cards. But out of it, we did get the new Nala card, which is a card you could slot into Amber Steel, especially in an aggressive deck. You know, maybe if you're playing the Amber Steel Dock deck, you know, pretty much the way we're playing it right now. But imagine you had that. You had Nala and you had Piglet. You still had Rapunzel, who was able to draw you more cards. You still had access to all your removal. You could still play the Zeuses and the Storms. You know, maybe we're hitting high on ink counts, but in this format, maybe Tiana's not a very good play, so we take her out and we get 4 on ink slots back in the deck. So if you really watch any of the games, sometimes it's just mad to see sort of Amber Steel having the ability to do a Daisy into a Nala into Lady Piglet, or Daisy and another Piglet, and then just keep going wide and just present so much lore to the point where Ruby Sapphire items really has to lock you down early on, and the Sapphire Steel items has to really get that bell turn very early on. And even still, singing Let the Storm on Nala isn't going to take it out. It would just stop the lore, so you'd have to wait for it to quest and then you can take it out. And they might just be presenting so many threats. Daisy, Nala, Lady, Piglet is so much for Sapphire Steel to go, well, I get my bell turn 1, I ramp, and then now I've got multiple threats and I don't really have that many ways to answer it. So it's fairly interesting with the very small amount of cards that we got from set 9, how much that also impacted Infinity, and mainly just Nala allowing these steel decks to be even quicker. I think another interesting point as well is a deck that I didn't think was going to do that well in the format is Kiwi, and a gentleman managed to ride it all the way to the finals, which was really cool, a really interesting build. And I think for that deck as well, you've got access to, I assumed he was playing more Vinny than that, but whenever I clicked on it, whenever I saw him, he always had a Vinny to access. But yeah, just I think it also leans into that thing with this format is very, very good for pet decking. Like, if you just know your deck well, you've got access to all those cards, you know what you're doing. You now can tech into anything, you can build any way you want, and manage to ride it all the way to the finals. And what he lost to was a Steel Song, which, again, I don't think Steel Song is far out of it, but if we're looking at on the paper what decks can really do the most powerful things, Sapphire Steel and Ruby Sapphire, they have that Hiram back in the game. They can do all of their item synergy, they can dime tap for 1 billion lore, they can fully control the boards with Big Sisu or Tinks and Hades and whatever Sapphire Steel is using. They can do all those things. But of course, if you're a very good Amber Steel player and Amber Steel Whole New World player, and you come back to it and now you have access to all your tools again, I can't see why you also wouldn't be doing very well. And this is from Alex, who's I think goes by the name Wochuck online, if you know, and he managed to win an event with it. And yeah, it's just his preferred deck of choice. I don't think Steel Song is very, very weak in this format, but it's, I don't think on paper it's as good as, say, the Amber Steel Aggro or the Sapphire ramp decks, like the Hiram decks. But because you're just good at the deck and you have the reps in it, I think that always helps as well. So the format, I think, is surprisingly a lot more healthier than the first assumption was going to be. Of course, the first assumption was, anything that was that set 7 ban would just be overpowered, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems we have a lot of viability, and I think as well on a very good day or a different day we'd see a lot of the green purple coming through and sort of winning formats as well, just being able to maximize more stuff with the Diablo. I don't think we realized as well, because we didn't get to play it much, it was sort of right at the tail end, but the green purple discard deck was so efficient at being able to discard hands, so efficient at being able to card draw because it played the purple guards, and getting that Diablo down and locking out the game was just very, very strong. So even that deck has a very strong standing in it. But if we're looking at sheer power levels, if you want to go on, maybe you're approaching the format to begin with, I think, yeah, both the Sapphire decks are performing very, very well. And then the Amber Steel Aggro has a very good shot as well. Of course, Amber Steel's Aggro is one of its weaker matchups, tended to be into Steel Song, so that it sort of gains a good matchup as well in the format. So it's fairly interesting to see it all unravel, really. Of course, Amber Steel Whole New World always had a weak game into the Ruby Sapphire, but I think it could still be a Sapphire Steel if it was played well and the matchup went right for them. It can beat the Amber Steel Aggro, but of course, it's always have a very fairly horrendous matchup into Ruby Sapphire. So it's ended up being quite a healthy meta, and I've actually got 4 lists I want to show here. As we can see, like from those 33 new cards we got that we wouldn't have had prior to this set, and the access of Hiram back again, we pretty much have like the build that this is from Justin, the creator of Kiwi. We all love Justin on this channel, and it's pretty much the same deck that he was sort of rocking prior to this. Maybe the Beyond the Horizon is in there as well. That's very interesting because you've got big characters and you can just get to that high ink level, and even a Tipo and an Amari could sing Beyond the Horizon. And a 1 diamond there because, to be honest with you, will probably cycle through the deck enough to find it, especially with the Scrooges. And if not, maybe Tamatel just quests for a ton of lore anyway and we can win the game. And the Fortisphere's back as well. I think a lot of people who love Sapphire Steel will be very happy to pick up these decks, and it performed very well for him. He didn't manage to get the win on the day of this, but on one of the two major events, the two winners, one was an Amber Steel, as the list I just showed you, and the other one was a gentleman called Luke, who I think that's Wonderland. I'm not sure. I should have checked actually. I think it is Wonderland, who managed to win it with Sapphire Steel using a very similar build to this, with a few different cards. But yeah, something else to say is, Justin just knows this deck very inside and out. Watching him play, he knew, like, sometimes it's very interesting to watch him navigate a turn where you think, oh, I would not have taken those lines, or I would not have prepared that way. But having that year or year and a half, I can't remember how long Lorcana's been around for, reps into the deck as well, and knowing what to expect, really just shines through, and you just get such an impactful deck. So I think that's a good one to show. This was, again, Alex's one that he won with it. He knows these cards inside and out, and I think all of those things are pretty good. And I would like to say that the entire format is a pet deck thing, just bring what you want, but it does look like some of them, maybe Ruby Amethyst, maybe possibly can't perform at the same level as the other decks have, and we were kind of seeing that near to the end of the rotation. When we got set 8 and set 7, Ruby Amethyst wasn't holding up as much as it would be. But I find even in that pre-ban set 7 stage, a lot of people were cooking with these location Ruby Amethyst decks, and the decks have to evolve and adapt, and people find their way to really keep playing their pet deck and carry it on forward. But Amber Steel just fundamentally has always been, Amber Steel Song has always fundamentally just been a very strong choice, and you put it behind a good player as well, and they can really just carry it on to the win. And this is the sort of more interesting thing that I thought about the format was, so this is an Amber Steel aggro deck. This is one of the many that I took. You could go a bit more consistent with this. You could tell you things like take the Vinnies out and just maximize things like the Lilo 1-drops, or just put more Let the Storms in, and maybe focus more on the songs. Or you can just go for these crazy decks that are just max amount of how much lore can I cram into a deck. And Amber and Steel basically is amassing to a point where it can still use its removal, like Let the Storm and Strength, but on top of that, it just has a bunch of characters that say quest for 3 lore or quest for 2 lore, and they're very cheap to play. So they can have this just really bursting powerful deck where your opponent basically has to be on it every turn. If you're opening with that Daisy Nala, they have to have responses for that, and you've presented about 7 health worth of like character health on the board, so they're going to have to interact with it. And like I say, I think this is still very early on for Infinity. I don't think it gets the attention that it, like the other formats will, especially the main format, Core Constructed. But so the innovation's a little bit slower on that. I say, a lot of people went straight for their pet decks, but it felt like the Amber Steel aggro was the first one that was a bit more innovative. They were like, right, actually, wait a minute, we've got Nalas now, and then we could probably just put, I like this gentleman's put the Lilo 1-drops in here, just to put more lore questing, more chance to open with a 2-quester on 1. And it's just mad. And they're probably also taking advantage of a lot of people wanting to play these big powerful Sapphire decks, saying that, well, I'm just going to build massive burst lore decks instead and just race you, so you never get to do any of your Tamatoa Dime stuff. I just think it's really cool. And I understand a lot of people are not going to like aggro. They're probably not going to like that the format has a very strong deck that just bursts out tons of lore and can make games over within 2 minutes. But, I thought that was quite interesting. Into a format where we predicted these 2 powerful Sapphire decks would dominate, it kind of actually really got pushed to the point where this deck that could counter that by just being huge amounts of lore burst, it kind of was actually winning it, I think, by the meta shares and what was actually being played at these events. This one really took over, and ended up being quite an important deck. So yeah, and the last one as well, just a Ruby Sapphire in there. I think a lot of people were trying different cards out. I think that Alice promo card's pretty cool. But on top of that, we're just looking at the exact same sort of Ruby Sapphire builds that we've seen before. And again, it's always weird to say Ruby Sapphire was a pet deck for people, but it kind of was, really, let's be honest. A lot of people liked it, and they played it to a very good level. And now that it's kind of gone away and it's not the same beast it was, people have just moved on. But I'm pretty sure a lot of players really loved pet decking Ruby Sapphire, especially with the big Sisu. There's a lot of people who really enjoyed sort of Sailors lists and everything. So I think it's just really good control. You get to keep your Hyrims in the game still. I think it might even push out the option of playing Ruby Sapphire Shark. I think Ruby Sapphire Shark's a bit weaker, especially Sapphire Steel. getting back to where it was before, because it gets Hiram back and it has its Fortispheres and it can sing Zeus, it can Hades, it can kind of take away all its threats and leave it with just trying to put pressure on with the mana. Amber still aggro can just aggro it out. You know, it doesn't matter if they get one super goof. If you've double Nalaed pigleted them, they're not really going to care. And super goof doesn't even take out Nala, so that's just another thing that I think is pretty mad. But the Ruby Sapphire Sisu list seemed quite strong. You know, it's the whole toolbox of removal, lock them out of the game, and then I'm probably going to get a Tamatur to quest for a ton of lore there. I think on the face value, it does look like Sapphire kind of rules Infinity, but no, if you go in knowing that information, you can build around it. Say you can build very aggressive decks, like Chernodogs is still, I think, a possibility. Discard, they get the entire discard package back. We saw Green Steel sort of fall off by the end of set 8, set 7. Like, it really wasn't the same it was, but Green Purple discard was working very, very well. So that could be an option to play that deck again. So everything kind of got its tools back, and I think discard is a very strong way to deal with these these Sapphire decks that are harboring giant hand sizes and playing huge things. I know Hiram was always kind of the thing that ruined that game plan, but how aggressive the green purple can be with its discard is pretty powerful. It can also bounce the Hiram and then maybe discard it as well. So you have all of those amazing options. So it's surprising to me how healthy the meta feels, but the deck that kind of interests me the most is the Amber Steel aggressive decks of, maybe as we go forward and we get another set, we're just going to get more cards that say they quest for a ton of lore and they're very cheap, and it's just going to amass to this deck where maybe Ravensburger has to step in and say, right, this deck wins within 2 minutes because, you know, by turn 3 you're representing like 16 lore. That's never going to happen, but you know, it's just great that someone went, it's not what I thought about. I thought, you know, Diggy Hole kind of was a little bit quieter than it's ever been in set 7 to 8. We had some really great builds, or like, I really enjoyed the hybrid build, but it was not really as loud as it has ever been, you know, when Diggy Hole was around. But in Infinity it seems a very, very strong option. I say that like I didn't play a lot of Amber Steel in set 8. I did. I really did. I did enjoy the deck, but I felt like it was getting a bit quieter than it had been, and Steel Song was still fairly strong counter to it. So the meta seems very wide. It seems lots of options. Yes, we kind of know the power levels of what the Sapphire decks can do, but there's a lot of innovation in there, and I think it's very much the format for pet decking. I think especially if you're going to be playing locally and maybe you're only going to be playing side events with it, it'll be great for you to like get out your classic deck, like you've always been the green purple tempo player, and you get to get it out and you get to foil it and play it as side events at like a DLC. Maybe you've had a rough day and you made it, dropped out of Swiss in the main event, and you get to play your side events with Infinity. And then of course we have the Infinity DLC as well. Again, I think if you're a master of your craft or whatever you play, maybe it is green purple Diablo, just stick with that. It seems like it still has a very good shot. There was a lot of things making it to top cut and producing pretty good records, and this was only from 2 events as well. You know, different regions have different sort of interests in meta, different sort of decks they like. I always find Europe and US produce different results just because of preferences on decks. So yeah, I think it's surprising to me how much Infinity is going to be a very fun format.